Louis Vuitton did not become powerful because its bags were rare. It became powerful because everyone could recognize them, even people who could never buy one. Read that again slowly, because it breaks almost every rule of how luxury is supposed to work. Luxury is built on scarcity, on access, on the idea that the thing behind the glass is not for everyone, that its value is inseparable from the difficulty of obtaining it. That is the theory. That is the rule. Louis Vuitton rewrote it. The brand became the most recognizable luxury symbol in the world, not by hiding itself, but by making itself legible. By printing its identity so clearly, so consistently, and so durably onto the surface of its products that the logo itself became the signal. That decision, to make the mark the message, built one of the most valuable luxury empires in history. It also created a problem that the brand has been managing ever since. This is the full story. Louis Vuitton was born in 1821 in a small village in the Jura region of eastern France. He was the son of a farmer and a milliner. At 16, with almost nothing, he walked to Paris. The journey took 2 years. He worked where he could. He arrived in the capital of the 19th century's most fashionable empire and found his way into one of the era's most specific and essential trades. He became a laitier, a trunk packer. The word does not translate cleanly into modern English because the profession no longer exists in the way it did then. A laitier was not simply someone who made luggage. He was someone who packed it, who understood how valuable objects, gowns, jewelry, delicate instruments, the belongings of the wealthy should be organized, protected, and transported through journeys that were long, rough, and unforgiving. He worked for the finest clientele. He learned what luxury required on the road. In 1854, he opened his own workshop. His name was on the door. His product was a trunk. To understand what Louis Vuitton was selling in 1854, you have to understand what travel meant in 1854. Travel at that moment in history was transforming. Railways were spreading across Europe. Steamships were connecting continents in weeks rather than months. For the wealthy, mobility had become a defining expression of status. To travel was to participate in the modern world. To move between cities, between countries, between continents, this was what the privileged could do, and everyone else watched. The luggage of the era reflected this. A well-made trunk was not a practical object in the way we think of a suitcase today. It was a statement. It traveled on the roof of a carriage, on the deck of a ship, in the hold of a train. It was visible. Other travelers saw it. Porters handled it. Hotel staff noted it. The quality of what you traveled with communicated something about the quality of where you had been and where you were going. Vuitton understood this immediately. He built his trunks with a flat top, a departure from the traditional dome-shaped lid that was standard at the time. The flat top allowed trunks to be stacked. More practical, more efficient, but it was also more elegant. Cleaner, modular in a way that felt modern. The interiors were lined with a gray cotton canvas that kept garments protected from moisture and dust over long journeys. The product was functional at its deepest level, and that functionality was itself an expression of luxury. Luxury in the original sense meant that someone had thought carefully about your comfort. The business grew, wealthy clients, the expanding world of European travel. A workshop that moved to progressively larger spaces as demand outpaced capacity. By the 1870s, Louis Vuitton was making luggage for some of the most prominent people in France. The brand's reputation was for quality that survived the journey. But reputation in the luxury goods world creates a second problem almost immediately. When something is desirable, it gets copied. In the late 19th century, counterfeit and imitation luggage-carrying Vuitton-adjacent designs began appearing in the market. The patterns were close enough to suggest the association without being identical. The name, the construction, the prestige, all of it was fair game for imitation once the original had established its value. Vuitton's response was to change the surface of the product entirely. In 1888, the brand introduced a checkerboard pattern called damier canvas, distinctive, identifiable, more difficult to imitate convincingly than a plain fabric. Then, in 1896, the year after Louis Vuitton died, his son George introduced the Monogram canvas. The decision was remarkable. It covered the surface of the luggage with interlocking LV initials, stylized flowers, and geometric shapes. It was drawn from Japanese and Oriental decorative traditions that had become fashionable in Paris at the time. It was beautiful. It was intricate. And it was, from the beginning, deliberately hard to reproduce accurately. But it was also something else, something that Louis Vuitton may not have fully anticipated at the time. It was legible, unmistakably, instantly, irreversibly legible. From across a room, across a platform, across any distance at which a human eye could perceive pattern, the Monogram canvas announced what it was. The brand had printed its identity onto the surface of every product it made. The signal became stronger with every decade. The Monogram traveled the 20th century with the kind of cultural momentum that very few visual marks have ever achieved. It appeared in train stations and ocean liner cabins, in the luggage holds of the first commercial aircraft, in the films of Hollywood's golden era, in the hands of figures who represented the most glamorous idea of what a life could look like. It was not just a bag anymore, it was a language that did not require fluency to be understood. You did not need to know anything about leather grades, canvas construction, French craftsmanship, or the history of trunk making in 19th century Paris to read a Louis Vuitton monogram. The mark communicated instantly, across languages, across cultures, across economic backgrounds. That universality was the foundation of the brand's global power. But universality has a cost. When a symbol becomes globally understood, it becomes globally reproduced. This is the central contradiction at the heart of the Louis Vuitton story. The monogram's legibility, the quality that made it a global luxury signal, also made it a perfect template for imitation. A counterfeit bag works only when the original is recognizable. The less visible a brand's identity, the harder it is to fake convincingly. The more visible, the more legible, the more universally recognized, the more useful a reproduction becomes. Louis Vuitton, by creating the most recognizable surface in luxury goods, inadvertently created the most imitable one. Counterfeit luxury goods have existed as long as luxury goods themselves. But the LV monogram became, over the course of the 20th century, one of the most copied visual marks in the world. The pattern was reproduced in fabric markets in Southeast Asia, in street stalls in every major city, in online listings across every digital platform that has ever hosted commerce. Not because the original was cheap or poorly made. Because it was too famous to ignore. The more visible it became, the more vulnerable it became. And yet, and this is the part that makes the story so worth examining, the brand survived it. Louis Vuitton survived the counterfeit problem not by becoming less visible, but by making the gap between authentic and imitation as wide as possible in dimensions that could not be reproduced on a sidewalk. The store experience. The boutiques, controlled, architecturally considered, placed with precision in the most prestigious retail addresses in the world. The craftsmanship inside the product that no photograph could capture. The hardware weight, the canvas texture, the stitching intervals, the leather trim, aging. The entire world of ownership. The receipt, the box, the bag, the tissue paper that a bought-on-a-street corner reproduction could never replicate. The brand became more than a product. It became a system. A total experience of luxury that happened to include a handbag at its center. In 1987, Louis Vuitton merged with Moet Hennessy to form LVMH. The structure that emerged is the most significant luxury conglomerate ever assembled. Under Bernard Arnault, LVMH grew to encompass dozens of the world's most prestigious brands across fashion, spirits, jewelry, watches, and retail. Louis Vuitton sat at the center of that empire. The engine, the symbol, the brand whose revenue and recognition funded everything else. The trunk maker had become an empire. What Louis Vuitton built, across more than a century and a half, is something that few commercial entities have ever achieved. It is not just a brand. It is a visual language of global aspiration, spoken fluently in every country on earth, in every economic context. The woman who saves for years to buy an entry-level piece, and the woman who buys trunks by the set both participate in the same symbolic system. The counterfeit owner and the authentic owner are, in a perverse sense, both testaments to the power of what Georges Vuitton designed in 1896, a surface so recognizable that the world could not stop reproducing it. That recognizability comes at a price. The brand must continuously invest in the quality, the experience, and the cultural positioning that separates the original from everything made in its image. It must maintain the tension between ubiquity and desirability, a tension that has no permanent resolution, only permanent management. It must keep being worth copying. because the day the counterfeit market loses interest is the day the luxury signal has finally faded. This is the full story. From a 16-year-old who walked to Paris with nothing to a workshop that packed trunks for the wealthy travelers of a modernizing world, to the Monogram that became the most recognizable luxury mark ever printed. To the empire built around that mark, to the shadow empire of copies that grew up around it, and to the brand that survives all of it by remaining at its core worth carrying. The trunk maker built a world. The world learned how to copy it. The trunk maker's name is still on every bag. This is the Bag Archives.